So thank you very much for having me here. I found this conference on Lanyard a couple of months ago, and it was one of those things where I thought, well, I've never been to Sweden. I probably speak too quickly for most of you, so if I do speed up, feel free to wave frantically and have that look of desperation in your eyes as the understanding sort of decreases as I speed up. So I've never been to Sweden. And I'm shocked. Thank you for bringing the sunshine out for me, because I've heard that this time of year we shouldn't have much. But it's one of those odd conferences where my background growing up is not a typical background for what I would expect many of you have here. So I'm the daughter of a hacker, but he's more of a hardware hacker, shall we say. My dad is over on the right-hand side there. He's a wood turner, and the machinery that you're looking at is a truck axle, which he converted into a lathe. And growing up, we had very interesting conversations in the living room. This is the furniture that was turned on that big truck axle lathe. And the concept of a critique, a design critique, was something that I became very familiar with growing up. And also something that I found very frustrating, but I also learned very quickly which of my parents to go to depending on the type of feedback that I wanted to receive. So if I wanted unconditional love and affection, if I wanted to be reassured that I was a fantastic human being, I would go and talk to my mom. And if I wanted to have my work, whether it was a drawing or a painting or maybe a science experiment, analyzed and critiqued, I would go and talk to my dad. And in part because my dad was trained as a designer. He went to the Royal College of Art in England, where he got a master's in design. And so my background when it comes to software development is more from this sort of analyze and critique perspective, and also one of unconditional love for my developers. So I now work as a project manager. I'm what I will affectionately refer to as a recovering developer. It is something that I have done in the past, but I don't do much of anymore. And that communication part, in terms of my experience growing up, is something that has stuck with me, and it's something that I still, to this day, find difficult and frustrating. And so instead of shying away from it, and instead of sort of perhaps choosing the path of the lone developer who doesn't communicate as much as they should, I've jumped into it more, and I've taken the time to study it and think about, from a critical perspective, what is it that makes communication so difficult? Why do I get so frustrated with people sometimes? And how can I improve the experience for other people? And one of the things that I did a couple of years ago was I studied a system which is quite like Myers-Briggs. Have people either heard of, have you heard of Myers-Briggs? And have you taken the test? Have you done sort of a little assessment? And how many people just won't put up their hands when asked or have no idea what I'm saying right now? Okay, this is an audience calibration thing. There's always a few. Yeah. So Myers-Briggs is a personality assessment system, and it gives you a range of, I believe it's 16 different combinations in a very, this is maybe not the right word, but almost a fatalistic point of view, in that once you are assigned that type, you put it on your Twitter profile and you're expected to behave in a certain way, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, if you're sensing and I can't remember all the combinations. But I've taken the test. I've taken it in the morning before coffee, and I've taken it slightly after coffee, and I have to say, I'm not the same person. So one of the things that I found is that the systems that are out there that we use are really quite limiting. So the system that I took or trained in a couple of years ago is referred to as the 4DI system. This is my profile. Yes, it's a system. Yes, you can go and look it up online, but I want to show you in this presentation that it has some interesting things. You don't need to go and do the assessment, but there's two things that I quite like about it. First of all, it's the questions are asked from a work perspective, so they are always in the context of when communicating with your coworker, as opposed to a broader sense. So it acknowledges that the way we behave at work is perhaps not the same that we would behave, or we don't necessarily react in the same way at home as at work. So that's the first thing that I like. And the second thing that I like is that they are skills which we can choose to develop and use, but they do not define who we are as a person. And there's a third version of this chart that gets even more detailed. The one thing that I do want to point out is that the areas where I'm a little bit lower, there's actually two parts on this where I have a flat out 0. So I actually show up as a 0 for empathy at work, which is an amusing characteristic for a project manager. So you don't need to take the system. That happened to be my result. Tomorrow when we have the open day, I'm happy to talk to you more about the system and show you in depth what my profile looks like. But really what I want you to take a look at are the different ways of thinking. And I know it's 4DI, the fourth dimension, if you've done any kind of role-playing games or any kind of games where there's an amplifier effect. The fourth dimension is how likely you are to initiate action or act on any of these particular modes of thinking. So we've got essentially 3 different styles or 3 different ways that we can approach a problem. We can either create, we can understand, or we can make decisions. And I'll go through each of these 3 different styles, give you some of the characteristic phrases from each of these different ways of thinking, and then we'll see how we can apply those, especially in meeting situations. So the first one here, we've got creative thinking, and within creative thinking, you'll see at the very bottom there is flow. So this is divided into ways of thinking that I will think of as thinking that takes hard work or some kind of action, and thinking that happens to us. So I'm quite high in flash of insight. I will struggle with a problem forever. I'm not a great doodler. I don't draw things naturally. When I'm thinking through a problem, I just get frustrated and speak slower and louder. And then suddenly the idea will come to me and I'll know how to solve the problem. In terms of these other ones, the reframe, I'm lousy at thinking 5 years out. I can't envision easily what the future might look like. But what I'm very good at doing is pivoting. So I'm very good at taking a problem that someone has brought to me and saying, I see how if we've got this rock in our path, we need to flow around the rock to move just one step forward. So 2 very different ways of thinking. If you are working with creative thinkers, generally speaking, you're going to hear these types of phrases. Can we try? I know we've decided, but what about? Oh my goodness, I've just had a great idea. Have you thought about doing things like this instead? Or have you thought about changing the way we do things? These are perhaps the folks who like to bike shed. If you know that expression, you've built your nuclear power plant, but you can't decide what color to paint the bike shed. So they're folks who are constantly going off in 100 different directions. And they don't need to necessarily be your creatives on the team in terms of the designers. They could be one of your engineers, but they're constantly off somewhere else. And so your job is to sort of rein them back in, bring them back in, and focus that energy into ways that are more productive for the task at hand. The next one is understanding thinking. And in the computer world, we tend to be, as an industry, very high in yellow or understanding thinking. We've got here tune in, empathize, and express. These are all sort of people-related skills. And then we've also got the scan, clarify, and structure. Those are information-related skills. I love to sort things. When we were talking in the first presentation about the kinds of things that you lose yourself in, I could sort books for hours. I could take piles of information and put them in folders. Stick-it notes are my best friend. So for me, this comes very naturally, whereas creative thinking is more of a challenge for me. Some common phrases. So what you're saying is, if you've got someone who constantly needs to repeat what you've just said in their own words, all they're being is high and yellow. It's all that it means. It's nothing to do with you. It's everything to do with them. They just need to clarify the information. Can you tell me how? So folks who, no matter how good the ticket is, they still need to have that step-by-step instruction. Again, high and yellow would be the language we use. Is this related to making the connections? So I made this spreadsheet. You probably know people like that. You may be the person like that. And then down on the sort of the human side of things, that must feel horrible. The person who's really great at empathy. I'm fantastic at tuning in. So if someone comes to me and they're already angry, I get angry right along with them for no apparent reason. It's not the same as empathy, though. So some common phrases here. And finally, decision thinking. How many people are in either a work or a personal relationship where neither of you like to make decisions? I am in one of I do not like making decisions, and my partner does not like making decisions, which means that an hour and a half later, we'll still be wandering the city wondering where we should eat. So in this case, we've got getting to the crux of the problem or the root of the problem, validating, using those metrics to help us make decisions, relying on experience. You know, your senior developer's like, I've seen this before. I know how it's going to go down. Let's just do it this way. Making conclusions, and then we've also got sort of that gut instinct, which is very difficult to essentially counteract, because there's nothing that can prove that the gut is wrong. So some common phrases for decision thinkers. I don't know why, but that would be that sort of gut instinct. I'm ready to move on. So if you've got someone who's high in red and someone who's high in green, instant conflict. We've already made a decision the last time we tried this, so I think the real problem is, and my gut tells me. Those are, again, those key phrases that when someone says that, they're probably high in this red or decision-making state. And if you're currently in a brainstorming state, if you're trying to generate ideas, this is shutting down the conversation. So you can probably think of some people who use those phrases quite commonly. Maybe you recognize yourself in some of those phrases. So sometimes meetings can feel a little bit like this, where we all bring our preferences to the meeting, the ways that we prefer to think, and what we need to do in order to get into a state of flow is realign the skills that we're using in that meeting. And that means changing the way that we structure a meeting to be not about a topic, but about what we want to achieve or the goals that we want to accomplish or the outcomes for that particular segment within a meeting. We need to stop wasting time where possible in meetings, and certainly the Agile process does have 1 or 2 meetings. But we also need to focus on being on the same page. And I know that certainly some of the meetings are much easier. A stand-up is straightforward. It's easy to say to someone, let's take this up in a later meeting. That's not what this meeting is for. But sometimes staying on the same page is quite difficult. And so the sort of extra tip that I bring to you as perhaps a meeting-heavy culture is how can you layer on this extra information in order to make your meetings even more productive. And a meeting could be an impromptu conversation with someone. It doesn't need to be a very highly structured meeting. But if we plan around outcomes instead of agendas, we can take these ideas of creative, understanding, and decision and actually sort of restructure our meeting to say, well, what do we want to accomplish during this unit of time? Do we want to accomplish a decision? Do we want to accomplish just an understanding and making sure that everyone is on the same page? Do we want to generate new ideas? What do we need as a result of this? So I've got a few different examples here. The first one would be decision-based outcomes. So if you need advice or recommendations, saying to someone at the beginning of the meeting, I don't need new ideas, I need a decision at the end of this, can help them to put them in that red frame of mind if they are especially someone who wants to spend too much time reviewing, if they're a yellow thinker, or if they love to generate new ideas, if they're a green thinker. Critical assessments, and then again also that idea of conclusions and decisions. Now there's different ways to get to red. You may start with a brainstorming exercise and then make a decision based on the new ideas that have been generated. So for example, a crisis has just come up. You're not entirely sure what the best way is to proceed, so you need to generate 10 or 15 different ideas so that you can then make a decision on how to proceed. It's very different than someone who is coming to you with a report or an analysis of some kind, and then you need to make a decision based on the report or the analysis, how you want to proceed next. Creative outcomes. So this time we're going to be opening doors up. Another sort of interesting reference for these creative outcomes are game storming. If you've read that book or you've seen any of the information about it, game storming, again, I don't have it written down in here. But it's another one where you're looking at idea generation. How do you open the experience up to new ideas, have the activity, and then close the game down again? So we may go from a report, and we may say, now I need, based on this information, I need to generate new ideas for me. Or perhaps where you need to start is with the crux of the problem, understanding what the real underlying problem is before you generate new ideas. Sort of slight variations, starting with a report versus starting with a simple problem. Maybe I should put that one in air quotes. And then understanding outcomes. So in this case, you may go from simply facts to understanding. So walking someone through information and then asking them if they have any clarification questions, asking them if they, just generally what's their emotional response. Sometimes you are dealing with reports that have layoff implications, that have budget implications, and making sure that people are on board can take sort of that hard data as far as numbers go, but have an emotional response to it. And of course, you can combine these different modes or ways of thinking into a longer session. So if we think of a typical meeting agenda, it may look something like this, where we've got topic 1, topic 2, okay, I'll pay attention. Ooh, there's a coffee break. I like coffee, that's nice. And then you come back and you're kind of bored and you don't really care anymore and you're wondering why you're going to have to spend 3 hours in this meeting and all you have to do is just sit there and now you're checking your email and it's a lot more fun now. But what if we restructured this meeting agenda in a slightly different way? So we still have the same time components, but what if we also said to people, at these points in the meeting, it's not simply going to be me telling you things, but I need you to give me input. It also means that for the folks who are high in yellow, this bit is going to suck, but it's only going to suck for 15 minutes. Well, yeah, there's only one segment in there that doesn't have yellow. And for the people who are naturally creative thinkers, they can see that there's going to be 2 segments of time that are going to be a lot more fun than the other segments. And for folks who are high in red, they actually like making decisions, there's going to be a couple of segments for them. So again, it's taking that same set of time, but saying to people, you probably have some ways that you want to engage and other times when you may want to pull back. If you don't love making decisions, maybe stay out of that part in a little bit of a way. So again, this is based on a system that I was trained in, 4DI. I don't think you need to do the training. If you want to do the assessment, we can talk about it later, but it's not meant to be a sales pitch by any stretch of the imagination. It's just if you want to do a bit more research on it. Ultimately, where preferences are at play, plan to speak with intention. Think about the language that you're bringing to the table as well as what the language that you're receiving, and ensure that you're acting and reacting in a way that's appropriate for the conversation you're trying to have. Thank thank you very much, and I've got a few minutes for questions. Yes.
I don't know why I'm the one running. I look ridiculous.
So I've read De Bono's Six Thinking Hats, which
Similar.
looks very similar.
Yes.
Read but not practiced. Would you say that there are any big differences between his kind of where green is still creative, and
Sure.
then he talks more about, you know, getting your feelings out, your positive feelings in one session, and aligning everyone to, now we're going to talk about positive things. Oh, now next 5 minutes we're going to talk about our fears. How would you compare the kind of methodologies here?
Quite similar, in part because Bob Wheely, the guy who came up with this system, took all of the different systems out there and basically smashed them into one. So where you see similarities with other systems, it's because he took the best bits of those systems. One of the things that De Bono does with that is he actively encourages people to have physical objects. So if you're putting on, you know, if you're giving, what are the different, which one's fact? Is
White.
White is fact. Then you physically put on your white hat so that people can see what it is that you're bringing to the table. I'm not meaning to bring emotion to this. I'm simply putting my white hat on. And in this system, Bob also has sort of cards. So you say, you know, you're sort of like a referee. You're in red, we're in green. So you give people that sort of timeout or reminder. So definitely a lot of similarities, in part because he's stolen or adopted the best of. Yeah.
Hi. This seems to work well if you've got someone in the meeting who's a chair, who's an arbitrator. If that's the case, can that arbitrator bring any opinions of their own, or do they have to remain completely impartial?
Can or should. So the note taker is meant to stay out of things, and they are not meant to voice opinions at all, so you would trade out if you need to. And the chair of the meeting, ideally everyone is aware of the system, so they're able to work together to be in the right state or generating the right ideas. Certainly in the system that he's got, the chair is encouraged to participate more, but it's not trying to use any kind of formal Robert's Rules of Order or anything like that. So they would be more involved, but the note taker would be strictly note taking.
Okay. Thanks.
Have you tried it as a facilitation technique? You said that you facilitate. What is your experience? Or are you open with how you think always? Or do you sometimes facilitate according to these things without telling people?
So having received the training, I'm far more conscious of it than I would be otherwise. But I also find that in especially difficult situations, even if the other people don't know the system, I'm able to describe what I'm perceiving in the situation in terms of saying, oh, it's okay that Danielle's, questioning my ability to do things. She's just being high and yellow and clarifying the situation. And so I can say that to Danielle's manager and say, I understand where she's coming from, having that empathy, but also saying, my give a shit button is broken, so you need to deal with it. Again, the zero empathy part. I get it, I just kind of failing to care. Sorry, that's being recorded as well, isn't it? Awkward. Maybe we should wrap up questions now.
Anyone from this side? All right.
Okay, thank you, everyone.